This is a revolution. I mean, a rascal revolution. I mean, political revolution for a change for Bougainville.
Tupla ona one time cowboy na sena BR commanders na interim government members only not long die long here. This pla true na no can deny. As Bougainvillians no can deny. Now you walk towards long straight in this pla secret plot today.
Buganville, a Pacific island of extraordinary beauty. But behind its green hills lies a story of one of the bloodiest conflicts in the Pacific since World War II, a war born from land, resources, and identity. In the early 1970s, the Panguna copper mine roared to life, carved deep into the mountains of central Bougainville. Operated by Bougainville Copper Limited, a subsidiary of the mining giant Rio Tinto, it was hailed as a triumph of modern industry. Within years, Panguna became one of the largest copper mines in the world, producing vast quantities of copper and gold, and generating nearly half of Papua New Guinea's total export revenue. For the government in Port Moresby and the company shareholders overseas, Panguna was a bonanza. But for the people of Bougainville, it was a very different story. The mine tore through ancestral lands, sacred sites were destroyed, and toxic waste poured into rivers and valleys. Despite sitting on one of the richest mineral deposits on Earth, local communities saw little benefit. Instead of prosperity, they were left with displacement, pollution, and the bitter knowledge that their island's wealth was flowing elsewhere.
As the years went on, frustration began to boil. Landowners watched as billions of dollars in copper and gold left their island, while their villages were left with little more than contaminated rivers and poisoned soil.
All our sources where we used to get clean drinking water, it's been polluted by the mine, by the tailings.
The divide between the wealth created by Panguna and the poverty experienced by Bougainvillians grew sharper with each passing year. Local voices called for fairer compensation, for cleaner practices, for a greater share in the prosperity being dug from beneath their feet. But their concerns were largely ignored by the mine company, by the government, and by those profiting from the mine.
By the late 1980s, anger had turned to defiance. Young men and women began organizing protests, demanding justice for their land and their people. When peaceful petitions went unanswered, resistance hardened. What began as demonstrations quickly escalated into sabotage, blockades, and eventually armed confrontation as frustration erupted. The Bougainville Revolutionary Army, or BRA, launched an armed campaign against the mine operations and the PNG government. In 1989, the Panguna mine was forced to close. What began as a protest became a full-scale civil war.
We wanted control of our land, our resources, our destiny. The mine symbolized everything that was wrong.
The PNG government responded with force, imposing a military blockade around Bougainville. No medicines, fuel, or supplies could enter. Hospitals collapsed, schools closed, and families were torn apart.
Defense forces sabe sud longor longan na kalau marasin sabe luz lon solwara na sampla time so holding pass boat when they marasin or when something stop long boat or defense force kisim or semblongo.
We lived in fear. There was fighting all around us as bullets and bombs exploded. Children died of malaria and mothers died in childbirth because there was no medicine.
Over a decade of fighting and deprivation, an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 people, nearly 10% of Bougainville's population, lost their lives. The war was not just bullets and bombs, it destroyed schools, hospitals, bridges, and homes. To this day, families remember the destruction as part of their daily struggle.
The mine site itself remains scarred, rivers poisoned with copper tailings. Even decades later, the legacy of contamination affects farming and fishing communities. The war magnified these wounds.
By the late 1990s, exhaustion and loss pushed both sides to the negotiating table. With support from New Zealand, Australia, and Pacific neighbors, the Bougainville Peace Agreement was signed in 2001. It granted autonomy, disarmament, and the promise of a future referendum on independence.
The peace process was fragile. Trust had to be rebuilt village by village, gun by gun. But the people of Bougainville wanted peace more than anything. The Bougainville Civil War left scars that may never fully heal. Scars on the land, on communities, and on memory. But it also left a legacy of resilience. Bougainville rose from the ashes of conflict to demand dignity, autonomy, and a voice in its own future. Bougainville's struggle is a reminder. When land, people, and resources are ignored, the cost can be devastating. The world must never forget.
As Bougainville pushes for full independence by 2027, the world is reminded of the silent giant in its mountains, the Panguna mine. Once the beating heart of Papua New Guinea's economy, today it lies as a rusting scar reclaimed by forest, yet it may again hold the key to Bougainville's future. Panguna became more than a mine, it was the symbol of injustice that ignited Bougainville's independence struggle. In 2019, over 97% of Bougainvillians voted for independence from Papua New Guinea. But independence requires an economy strong enough to sustain schools, healthcare, and infrastructure. That's where Panguna re-enters the story.
Without revenue, independence is only a dream. Panguna could fund our future, but only if we do it right this time.
Our generation wants independence, but we also want a clean environment. We cannot sacrifice one for the other.
Experts estimate that Panguna still holds up to $80 billion worth of copper and gold, and global demand for copper is skyrocketing, driven by the green energy revolution. Electric cars, solar panels, wind turbines, they all need copper. Bougainville's mine could be the answer. The timing is perfect. If managed properly, Panguna could place Bougainville at the center of the global green economy. But the shadows of the past loom large. For many, the wounds are still fresh. Communities fear a repeat of environmental destruction and social division. When I see the mine, I remember the suffering. If it reopens, who will guarantee this won't happen again? The mine sits in a fragile ecosystem. Without strict safeguards, Bougainville could face another environmental disaster. Bougainville walks a tightrope, balancing the promise of independence against the painful lessons of history. The question is not just whether the mine can reopen, but whether it can reopen fairly, sustainably, and peacefully. Ownership, revenue sharing, and environmental protection must be clear. Otherwise, we risk repeating the cycle of conflict. Bougainville's economy stands at a crossroads. Cocoa has become the backbone of daily livelihoods, while the dormant Panguna mine holds billions in potential. But how do the numbers really compare? And can Bougainville strike the right balance between a farming economy and a resource economy? Estimates suggest Panguna still holds up to US $80 billion worth of copper and gold. A more realistic projection by Bougainville Copper Limited puts revenues closer to US $36 billion over 20 years, or about $1.8 billion per year in gross output.
If managed well, Panguna could transform Bougainville's fiscal position. Even a modest share of $1.8 billion annually is more than the entire region currently earns from cash crops.
Cocoa, however, is Bougainville's economic lifeline today. Papua New Guinea's cocoa exports generate about 1.2 billion kina annually, and Bougainville contributes around 540 million kina. That's approximately US $132 million each year.
Our cocoa pays for school fees, for food, for medicines. It may not be billions, but it keeps every household alive.
Here's the comparison. Cocoa contributes about $132 million per year. If Panguna reopened, a 5% royalty could deliver about $90 million annually, and a 10% royalty around $180 million. With taxes, equity stakes, and local procurement, the total public receipts could far surpass cocoa. Cocoa cannot alone fund independence, but together with mining, it can build the fiscal base Bougainville needs.
Yet the numbers don't tell the full story. Panguna's past left environmental scars that still affect rivers and land. Cleaning up and managing future impacts will cut into revenues. Cocoa, on the other hand, is sustainable, community-based, and environmentally friendly, though far smaller in scale. Mining money can vanish quickly if remediation costs are ignored. Cocoa, though modest, is steady and locally owned. The Panguna mine is more than just copper and gold. It is a test of leadership, memory, and vision. Bougainville's choice will shape not only its future, but may also set an example for resource-rich nations around the world. The choice is not Panguna or cocoa, it's how Bougainville can harness both, mining for big infrastructure and independence revenue, cocoa for household stability and resilience. The real question is whether the region can secure fair terms for Panguna, without sacrificing the land and livelihoods that sustain its people today. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
If you have enjoyed watching this video, please give it a like, and subscribe if you have learned something new.